There's this really fascinating contradiction right at the heart of our own minds. It's this deep conflict between what the mind actually is and what it desperately wants to be. And believe it or not, this paradox shows up in our lives in some surprisingly familiar ways.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever been super stressed out and your first instinct is to just tell yourself, okay, just relax, stop thinking so much. You try to issue a command to your own brain to just be still. And what happens? It almost never works, right? The more you push, the harder you try to be calm, the more wired and agitated you get. That very effort to find peace seems to just shove it further and further away. Well, it turns out this isn't some personal failing. It's actually a fundamental feature of how the mind is built.
To really get why this happens, we kind of have to pop the hood and look at the mind's basic architecture. And let's not think of it as some mystical, unknowable thing, but more like a very specific kind of machine with its own operating system.
So at its core, the mind is basically a processing unit. Its building blocks are thoughts, but here's the crucial part. Thoughts are extended in time. They don't just happen all at once. The mind has to work through them sequentially, moving from one to the next, and that process always requires effort.
And this is really the key takeaway right here. It's a totally linear, step-by-step process. It has to go from thought A to thought B to thought C. It's fundamentally stuck in time and sequence. That is its unchangeable, hardwired operating system.
And this slide just lays out the core problem perfectly. On the one hand, you have the mind's actual nature. It's sequential, it's time-bound, and it runs on effort. But on the other hand, look at what it so often desires: a state of unified, timeless, effortless peace. It wants to be something that, by its very definition, it can never be. This complete mismatch is the source of the whole conflict.
So this brings us right to what our source material calls the striving for stillness paradox. And it really is an unwinnable game that the mind is constantly playing with itself.
First, let's just be clear on what we mean by striving. This isn't just about trying hard. It's a very specific mental act. It's that internal insistence that there's a problem, a deficiency, a lack, and it must be fixed. It's that active push against a feeling that something is wrong.
Okay, so at some point, maybe through a moment of real insight, the mind has a huge breakthrough. It recognizes that the very feeling of agitation, that lack of peace, it's being caused by its own constant striving. The effort is the problem. But here is the trap. The moment the mind identifies a problem, even if that problem is striving, what does it do? It reaches for the only tool in its toolbox. It starts to strive to stop striving. It tries to solve the problem of effort with more effort. And this is where it all becomes just crystal clear and a little bit absurd. The goal is stillness, a state of zero effort, but the only tool the mind has to get there is effort and striving. It is literally like trying to build a silent room with a jackhammer. The very method you're using makes the goal completely impossible.
This quote from the text just nails it. The mind gets caught in this completely inescapable, self-defeating loop. The means, the act of trying, actively destroys the end goal of stillness. It's a game it absolutely cannot win.
So what happens when any system gets trapped in an inescapable, illogical loop? Well, eventually it crashes. And that is exactly what is set up to happen to the mind's logical processing function.
So the mind gets its primary directive, which is baked into its very nature. You are a processor. You must think. You must move from one thought to the next. You must strive. It's what you do. But at the exact same time, it's holding this new enlightened goal, which becomes a totally opposing command. To find peace, you must stop striving.
So now the mind, as a logical processor, is just stuck. It cannot compute these two mutually exclusive commands, strive and don't strive. It's a paradox, a logical contradiction. The system hits a fatal error. It cannot proceed. And this is the real climax of this whole internal struggle. The processing unit just freezes. It's paralyzed. But the source tells us something incredibly profound happens in that moment of collapse. When the machine finally stops running, something else is revealed: pure awareness. And this leads us to the final and most transformative insight of all. This paralysis, this so-called system crash, it isn't actually a failure. It's a profound, if totally unexpected, form of liberation.
In other words, the mind's inability to solve this paradox is the very thing that forces a massive shift in perspective. The breakdown of the processor is, in a very real way, the entire point of the exercise.
And here we can see the huge distinction. The mind, it's a functional simulation. It's a tool that can only ever know the reflections of reality in a mirror. But pure awareness, that is the mirror itself. It's the silent, timeless background that was always there, before the processor even started running.
So, what is this pure awareness, really? Well, it's not something the mind does. It's what is left over when all the doing stops. It isn't just another thought or another feeling, but the silent space in which all those thoughts and feelings appear. And crucially, it's not an act of will or effort. It's an effortless act of simply seeing what is, without that constant filter of the striving mind.
So I'll end with this question to chew on. What if the mind is actually designed to eventually chase an impossible desire, to run headfirst into a logical wall it can't break through, and to ultimately crash? What if that exact moment of failure is precisely what's needed to reveal the deeper, silent awareness that was there all along?